How do you do? Mr. Carl Laemmle feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
I wouldn't be the kind of writer I am today if it weren't for the early horror films, especially those of Universal.
I have to admit, I don't admire horror films. I think they're tacky. I hate the art direction. They just don't look right to me.
I never felt that way. I felt the insides of the castles, and certainly Frankenstein, the laboratory, is one of those moments that one of those visions you can never forget.
I never got enough of them. You got scared, but you enjoyed it.
I don't like scary movies. And I don't go to scary movies.
All right. Camera. You're helpless, Anne, helpless. There's just one chance. If you can scream, but your throat's paralyzed, try to scream, Anne, try. Perhaps if you didn't see it, you could scream. Throw your arms across your eyes and scream, Anne. Scream for your life!
What's he think she's really gonna see?
This house in Hollywood is the home of Forrest Ackerman. He has turned it into a museum for science fiction and horror, known affectionately as the Acker Mansion, Horrorwood, California. Through his magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland, Ackerman excited a new generation to the horror film, youngsters like Steven Spielberg and John Landis being especially keen on those from Universal.
Universal horror to us in the 30s, it meant that almost monthly we were going to have a gourmet feast of horror.
Have a potato.
It would not only be quantity, but quality. All of the Universal films really were outstanding.
Going out after vampires. Vampires? Vampires! Ha, ha, ha! But I always understood you went after them with checkbooks, sir.
Listen to them. Children of the night. What music they make.
I coined the phrase Hollywood Gothic to describe, that ambiance of the early Universal films, and it was new and it was novel, and audiences flocked to these pictures. They had never seen anything like Dracula. They'd never seen anything like Frankenstein.
Bride of Frankenstein opened with a prologue to mark the horror film's debt to English literature. In 1816 in Switzerland, Lord Byron, Percy Shelley, and his fiancée Mary set a writing contest, which resulted in two of the most celebrated of all horror stories.
Astonishing creature.
I, Lord Byron?
Frightened of thunder, fearful of the dark, and yet you have written a tale that sent my blood into icy creeps. Look at her, Shelley. Can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein? A monster created from cadavers out of rifled graves?
I don't know why you should think so.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein became a stage play, and Byron's vampire outline went through several hands until Bram Stoker applied the finishing touches in Dracula. On the screen, Dracula was immortalized by Bela Lugosi. Frankenstein's monster was Boris Karloff, not a Russian, but an urbane Englishman whose real name was William Henry Pratt. He also played the ancient Egyptian, brought back to life in The Mummy. Universal introduced a fourth great monster, the Wolfman, played by Lon Chaney Sr.
It was only Universal that created a franchise, that created recurring characters, diverse monster characters, and mined them for everything they could get. These kinds of programmers became really the backbone of the studio's income, and without them, Hollywood history would be very different. I mean, where would Americans go for their summer vacations if not to Universal Studios?
Universal is one of the few studios to allow the public to tour its backlot. It is the only Hollywood studio still producing on its original site, with some of its old sets still standing. Highly successful now, in the old days, Universal was often in financial trouble. Its primary purpose was to make program pictures for rural audiences, with an occasional big picture to bring prestige. Long before she was acclaimed for her role in Titanic, Gloria Stewart knew the old Universal.
It was a B studio, and it was out sort of in the boondocks, the hills. They still were using hills behind Universal for Western locations.
Westerns provided a training ground for new talent. Both Janet Gaynor and Fay Wray started in two reel Westerns.
It was like a family. It was like a family. The atmosphere at Universal had a kindliness to it.
The studio was founded by Carl Laemmle, a German-Jewish immigrant who was devoted to his family. Once he had fought for the little man in the picture business, fought and won. Now his son was being groomed to take over the studio, which employed something like 70 relatives. Rebecca, Carl's niece, was a dancer who lived on the backlot and who changed her name to Carla.
He was a wonderful human being. He was very democratic. He would talk to everybody and listen to everybody. And people who brought their problems to him, he would listen to them. And if they needed any financial help, he would give them help.
Laemmle was not an educated man, but he employed a secretary who was. He made Irving Thalberg the head of the studio at 21, and he wasn't even a relative. Thalberg produced for Laemmle an epic. Directed by Wallace Worsley, The Hunchback was just another well-made historical drama. The reason no one who saw it ever forgot it was due to Lon Chaney. Quasimodo was a monster, but just as Victor Hugo had shown him as a human being, so did Chaney. His elaborate body makeup included the punishing burden of a 20-pound hump of plaster. Like Quasimodo under the lash, Chaney subjected himself to pain in pursuit of his art. Sets for The Hunchback dominated the backlot for years. That backlot is still recognizable, although it is now dominated by buildings put up for the Universal Tour. One building is seen by tourists only from its anonymous exterior. It contains the oldest film set in the world. The famous Stage 28, still in continuous use. Built in 1924 for the Phantom of the Opera, it contains the original Phantom set, carefully preserved under protective shrouds. The auditorium of the Paris Opera. Outside the Paris Opera, Carl Laemmle with the author of The Phantom, Gaston Leroux. Laemmle's first idea was to bring film crews to Paris, but that would mean closing the opera. The vast foyer was built on Stage 28, but Universal needed further technical advice. They called upon Ben Carré, a French art director working in Hollywood.
They were especially interested in Ben because he was one of the few people who knew the below stage area of the Paris Opera. He knew it very well.
This is Carré's drawing of the cellars. Universal's art directors reproduced it exactly in the film. This was the style forever to be associated with Universal horror. From drawings by a Frenchman, constructed by an Englishman, given the Gothic atmosphere of Germany. This most European of studios proved a creative melting pot. Even more important to the success of The Phantom was the cast. With Norman Kerry and Mary Philbin as the love interest, who would play the Phantom? Lon Chaney or It Can't Be Done, said director Rupert Julian. Chaney had a clause in his contract that no glimpse of his makeup should be seen before the film's release. Even publicity stills were censored. The Masked Ball was one of several scenes filmed in two-color Technicolor, making Chaney, costumed as the Red Death, look even more menacing.
I saw The Phantom of the Opera when I was 5, and I think I've never been so scared in all my life, and all the years since.
The most frightening part began when the Phantom abducted the girl he loves to his lair, and she becomes curious about his mask.
And as Mary Philbin was contemplating taking the mask off the Phantom, I was kind of leaning back in my seat, worried of what I was going to see.
As he was unmasked and you saw the face without a nose, really, just nostril, people screamed. It was the loudest scream I've ever heard in my life.
And that night, I went to see it with my brother, and we came home around 9 o'clock at night, and we crossed a bridge into a ravine, and he hid under the bridge. And when I crossed over, he jumped out and frightened me all over again. And I ran home screaming, and my father beat the hell out of my brother.
The Phantom had a troubled production. This final chase was shot by another director. Nevertheless, it grossed $2 million, more even than Hunchback, whose cathedral set it reused. After many recuts, the film became an ideal mixture of fantasy and horror, and a triumph for Lon Chaney. His makeup was disturbingly similar to the wounds of many war veterans. This soldier, just like the Phantom, was fitted with a mask to conceal the ravages of war.
World War I set in motion huge developments in the arts, in the dramatic arts, in the visual arts, and in the burgeoning medium of the motion picture. And much of this had to do with grotesquerie and distortion, surrealism, Dadaism, expressionism.
Made in Germany just after the war, Caligari was conceived as a shocker. The decor was carried out in a style guaranteed to upset people. Expressionism, often mistaken for cubism. It was modern art, regarded by many as degenerate. The design was the idea of the art directors. Caligari is considered the first true horror film, for it told of a monster compelled by a mad doctor to murder innocent victims. Dr. Caligari, played by Werner Krauss, is a carnival showman who uses a sideshow to conceal his crimes. His somnambulist was played by Conrad Veidt. A similar mad doctor appeared in Universal's mystery thriller. Its heroine was Laura LaPlante, and its shocks were laced with humor. American films always sidestepped the supernatural. Ghostly occurrences were invariably staged by criminals.
In that film, you can see all of the trappings of the later horror pictures, the long, dark corridors, the billowing curtains.
This adaptation of a Broadway hit involved the reading of a millionaire's will and a series of murders in an old, dark house.
Cat and the Canary is another film that affected me deeply, especially the scene in the library where the lawyer is talking about the will, and the bookcase behind him keeps opening a little, and there's a hairy hand coming out that's going to get him, you know, and it scared the hell out of me. So that's one of the most vivid scenes in any movie I've ever seen.
The film was directed by a German, Paul Lenny. He had made the film Waxworks with Conrad Veidt and had a fascination with the uncanny. His film was so successful it was remade in sound as The Cat Creeps, directed by Rupert Julian.
The name in the third envelope, name in the...
Two years later, James Whale would pay further tribute with The Old Dark House. Film critic Gavin Lambert asked Whale about the films which had influenced him.
He talked about Paul Lenny a lot. He particularly liked The Cat and the Canary for its mixture of comedy and horror. I could see why. He very much liked another film which I've never seen. I believe it might even be a lost film, called The Last Warning, which takes place, it's something to do with a murder that's been committed in a theatre while they're rehearsing a play, and I could see that that would appeal to James very much because he had a great sense of theatre and had been a theatre actor.
Carl Laemmle quickly became the leading director on the lot, and Carl Laemmle revived plans to repeat the success of Hunchback with another drama of disfigurement, The Man Who Laughs. The production supervisor was Paul Kohner. Like The Hunchback, it was based on a novel by Victor Hugo, and it was to star Lon Chaney. From 17th century England, a sect is being expelled, for they mutilate children to sell as freaks. This boy, Gwynplaine, has had his mouth disfigured. At the last minute, Chaney withdrew. Gwynplaine, grown up, was played by Conrad Veidt. It fell to a makeup artist named Jack Pierce to replace Chaney's artistry. Part of his job was to give Veidt a death's head smile. Gwynplaine and a blind girl, Dea, Mary Philbin, travel in the caravan of Ursus, who watches as they fall in love.
At the end of that film, when I first saw it when I was, I think, 6 or 7, I was in tears, and I went to see it again a couple of years ago, and the darn thing works, huh? Because you are the person in need. You are the person in agony. You are the person with the permanent smile.
Staged on a scale as lavish as Hunchback, with a dazzling command of the latest techniques, it was more sophisticated and ran into censorship troubles for its sexual boldness.
In the late 20s, movies were becoming a scapegoat on both sides of the Atlantic for civic groups and social reformers who were just convinced that movies were destroying morality and could incite, the youth of America and England to acts of violence and even murder. This actually was played out in a rather bizarre court case after the film London After Midnight was released, and a young man who had strangled his girlfriend in a park in London based his defense on the fact that he had seen Lon Chaney in London After Midnight, and his makeup had so unhinged his mind. The vision of that shark-like mouth and ghastly pale face had turned him into a murderer.
London After Midnight, a lost film, was a story of vampires closely related to Dracula. Chaney had long expected to play Dracula and Todd Browning to direct it. Browning and Chaney had started at Universal, but were now a team at MGM, renowned for its prestige pictures. Here, Browning directs The Mystic in 1925. MGM certainly had the finest technicians, yet Browning preferred a much simpler style, perhaps the equivalent of the carnivals in which he grew up.
But he had a huge impact on the development of the horror picture. His interest in disfigurement, mutilation, revenge melodramas dovetailed with the similar interests of Lon Chaney, and they did many unforgettable films. And they provided the blueprints and the roadmaps, I think, for a lot of the later talking horror pictures.
Chaney played a crippled gangster in The Penalty. Directed by Wallace Worsley, the film aroused protest for its violence, which encouraged the rise of censorship.
Why were audiences responding to these grotesque makeups and stories involving mutilation and crippled characters and deformity? And I think one of the reasons was that you had unprecedented numbers of maimed and mutilated soldiers returning from the Great War. And these were men who in earlier wars would have died from their wounds, but the same advances in science and technology that made the destruction possible also brought about advances in medicine that let these men live. And they, I think, were kind of a guilty reminder that just wouldn't go away about that war. And none of Lon Chaney's films really deal with a story of a wounded war veteran, but I think that's really what he was playing over and over and over.
In this scene, Chaney is visiting a surgeon to ask him to amputate his arms. He is a criminal recognizable by a genetic defect. Chaney loves a girl in the circus, played by Joan Crawford, who cannot bear to be touched. She believes him to be the armless cripple he poses as in the circus. He is gratified to see her rejecting the circus strongman, Norman Kerry. But when he returns from the operation, he finds them lovers. He decides to cause an accident which will tear the strong man's arms from his body. Tod Browning was the top director for these macabre films, and Universal signed him in the hope that he would make Dracula. Bram Stoker's novel had become a successful stage play, but Laemmle's studio readers warned him that no audience could stand it. But Uncle Carl gave the studio to his son as a 21st birthday present in 1929. He had raised the boy on German folklore.
Carl Laemmle Jr. Loved horror things. When he was a little boy, he was crazy about anything that had to do with the macabre and the horror. And so he thought it would be a great idea to make movies like that. But his father was dead against it. He thought it was a terrible idea.
Carl Laemmle was all in favor of entertainment. Here he is at a party, but Dracula couldn't be called entertainment unless Chaney was in it. Junior may have been in charge, but Dracula wouldn't be bankrolled without Chaney. Paul Kohner wanted to do Dracula with Conrad Veidt and Paul Lenny, but Veidt went back to Germany and wouldn't return until the period during the war, when he made Casablanca, and Paul Lenny died suddenly from blood poisoning in September 1929. Kohner was elbowed aside and Junior became producer. He pursued the team of Browning and Chaney, and while he got Browning, Chaney was more difficult. Junior did not want the actor who had played the role on the stage and sent this telegram to his agent: "Not interested, Bela Lugosi." Chaney was terminally ill with lung cancer. He made one talking picture and died in August 1930.
Chaney died when I was 10 years old. It was the end of the world. I thought at the time that if death could die, and he personified death, if death could die, I wasn't safe. So his death threatened me. It was the first real outside death in my life that was a terrible event.
With Chaney gone, the front office had to reconsider their approach.
For the first time, the American cinema took a chance on a completely irrational and bizarre premise. Dracula was what he seemed to be. He was a 500-year-old blood-sucking demon from hell. And the studio shied away from it. They knew the stage play had been very, very lucrative. But one studio after the other just turned it down because they thought the public will never buy this.
The strength of the vampire is that people will not believe in him.
After considering a number of actors, Ian Keith, Paul Muni, Universal ordered a test of Bela Lugosi. He was so anxious for the role, he settled for a quarter of the salary of the juvenile lead, David Manners.
I can quite understand Mr. Harker's concern.
David Manners was interviewed by David Scarl in 1989.
He said the production was very disorganized and that the cast really did not take it seriously, with the exception of Lugosi, who apparently was, unlike a real vampire, couldn't get enough of his reflection in the mirror and apparently strode up and down the set in front of a full-length mirror with his cloak pulled over him, intoning to himself, "I am Dracula."
Now that you have learned what you have learned, it would be well for you to return to your own country. I prefer to remain and protect those whom you would destroy.
I grew up in Hollywood, and my mother was the script girl. And when she was carrying the script on Dracula, I went with her at night, and I'd sit on the coffins and do my homework while I was watching the filming. I don't know how my homework got done because I was terrified of Lugosi. I was convinced that he was the real Dracula.
He was Dracula. He always acted like Dracula. He became, he got into his character. So I was told then that he kept a casket on his room. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But that were the rumors. But he was very nice.
Nick Webster visited Lugosi's house with his mother.
As I remember, the house was also kind of dimly lit, velvet hangings and that sort of thing. It was there was an air of mystery there that as a young boy, I probably added to it in my mind. But the point was that it was a rather scary experience being in that dark, dim place and listening to Dracula with those piercing eyes of his.
For 30 years, audiences had enjoyed live music with their films, and the lack of it in the talkie made Dracula seem especially eerie.
It just so happened that I was in the opening coach scene of Dracula, and I spoke the first lines of dialogue in the picture, which seemed to have established me as a cult figure from that time on. Perhaps you'd like to hear the among the rugged peaks that frown down upon the Borgo Pass
are found crumbling castles of a bygone age.
I say, driver, a bit slower.
No. Must reach the inn before sundown.
Uno de los lugares más agrestes y menos conocidos de Europa.
For a few years, at the dawn of talkies, Hollywood was producing simultaneous foreign language versions of its domestic product. Some of these were in French, some of them were in German, most of them were in Spanish. And Paul Kohner had the opportunity to do the Spanish version of Dracula, and he decided to upstage Todd Browning's effort at every chance he could.
Kohner was only too anxious to work on the Spanish version. He'd fallen in love with its Mexican star, Lupita Tovar, who had just played in the Spanish version of The Cat Creeps.
So he went to Mr. Laemmle and said, the dubbing is fine, but the first studio that makes a picture with their own actors in their own language is going to be a sensation. And Mr. Laemmle says, well, you got any idea?
Kohner hired George Melford, a veteran director who spoke not a word of Spanish. He and his crew worked at night after the Browning Company finished.
Una vez que estaba yo en la terraza, salió de entre las sombras.
So the same way, working at nights, and we finished before the English. And when they saw it, it was a sensation because they all felt that it was more exciting than the English.
The result is a film that, unlike many of these foreign versions, which are very forgettable today, is actually superior on most technical levels to the Todd Browning film. You know, there's this myth that the camera, you know, in 1930 in Hollywood was, you know, immobilized behind these sound boxes, and it really was not the case. And there's a tremendous fluidity of camera movement in the Spanish Dracula, especially one shot where Dracula first appears, where a huge crane was used to kind of sweep up the steps from the bottom, from Renfield's point of view, to Dracula's full figure, you know, standing there holding the candle. It's really a stunning moment. Browning does very little with it in the film. Dracula is just kind of seen plodding down the stairs.
I am Dracula.
But in the Spanish film, Renfield comes into the Great Hall and is dodged by a bat. And then turns around and suddenly out of nowhere, framed in front of this huge spider web, is Dracula.
Soy Drácula. No podía usted ser más oportuno. Thanks. It looks very inviting. Ouch.
The English language version became a classic, mainly because of Lugosi. The Spanish version needed more elaborate technique because Carlos Villarreal was no match for Lugosi. In any case, they both drew from the F.W. Murnau original, a print of which Universal had just acquired. Murnau captured the very essence of Gothic legend in his film. Murnau had been brought to California by Fox.
But I know Paul had a terrific respect for Murnau. I admire him very much. And I think he followed his, in a way, the same ideas of him.
Similarities to the Murnau film occurred mainly in the Spanish version.
It was odd about Dracula because I think a lot of young people, myself included, had their first sexual little kicks because there was something about him at the neck of that girl, silently working away at it. And I know I've talked to several people, women included as well as men, who felt the same thing, that it was, and of course he was dressed so beautifully, and it was so suave, and the women were so beautiful, but once he was with them, they were at peace and rest, and they seemed very satisfied.
Thanks largely to Dracula, Universal had its only profitable year during the Great Depression in 1931. The supreme monster in the Universal Gallery was the one created by Mary Shelley.
Would you like one of my flowers?
He owed a lot to the golem, played by Paul Wegener, who made no less than 3 silent versions of this Jewish legend. A child accidentally removes the source of his energy. Played by Charles Ogle, the Frankenstein monster had first appeared on the screen in 1910 in a primitive Edison one-reeler. This press sheet is all that remains of a 1915 version with Percy standing. Bela Lugosi was offered the part after his success in Dracula. Director Robert Florey filmed a test reel, but to Universal's dismay, Lugosi turned it down.
He was right to have turned it down, though, because the script he was shown was not the script that Boris Karloff acted. The monster was only a grunting creature. It was a killing machine. It had none of the pathos that Karloff and James Whale brought to the final version.
On the opening credits, the role of the monster is left a mystery. Cameraman Arthur Edison gave the picture the look of a German silent film, as requested by James Whale, as did art director Charles Hall, who would design most of the horror films. Whale replaced Robert Florey. He had been a stage director and designer in England.
Whale at first didn't want to do it. He said he thought it was a joke. He also wanted to do mainstream assignments, and he wasn't sure about Frankenstein, although quickly he became excited by the possibilities of Frankenstein. He realized that Frankenstein was a classic of English literature. Frankenstein offered him a tremendous opportunity to create something new and different, and something that was, to a certain degree, based upon the films that he admired so much from Germany in the 20s.
Paul Wegener, one of the great German stars who had made the Golem, appeared in another film which had an influence on Whale. Directed by Rex Ingram, it had The Thunderstorm, The Tower, The Mad Doctor obsessed with creating life, even The Hunchback Assistant. The whole thing ended in traditional fashion. Just like The Bride of Frankenstein, The Ghost of Frankenstein, and The Black Cat. But Frankenstein had something the magician lacked: a monster.
The first time I saw Frankenstein, I hid under the seat. Even the coming attraction, I saw the coming attraction the week before. Scared the hell out of me.
The monster is created by Henry Frankenstein, played by Colin Clive, with an amazing panoply of electrical effects.
There was a man in Santa Monica named Ken Strickfaden, and he was a tinkerer with electronics, and he built all sorts of incredible machines that did all sorts of fancy but useless things. All kinds of zaps and bolts of lightning and everything. So they leased his equipment.
To hire Strickfaden's equipment cost Universal $10,000, a staggering sum for the period.
It's moving. It's alive.
What should this monster look like? Early representations ranged from the handsome to the ludicrous. Publicity for the 1910 version claimed it omitted anything that might shock. James Whale may have drawn upon a role he had played on the London stage: the mute, half-dead son in A Man with Red Hair. George O'Brien had worn boots weighted with lead in Murnau's Sunrise, which may have inspired the monster's walk. Boris Karloff had acted in scores of pictures since the war, but was still unknown.
Well, it seems perfectly simple to me.
He was recommended to James Whale, who saw that he had exactly the right qualities. He made some sketches and gave them to Jack Pierce, now in charge of makeup at Universal.
Jack Pierce was, I think, one of the finest makeup men I've ever known. He took such pride in whatever he did. And as a little girl, I used to watch him make up Boris Karloff as Frankenstein. I was absolutely fascinated.
Gloria Jean was a child star at Universal at the time Boris Karloff was making Son of Frankenstein and Tower of London.
But I'd sit there by the hour, and it took hours for him to make up.
I know that it was an extraordinarily arduous film to do. My father lost 25 pounds during the making of Frankenstein.
Jack Pierce's makeup for Boris Karloff was top secret. James Whale was asked for his approval.
And there was Karloff made up as the monster, sitting in front of a mirror in the makeup room. And he saw James come in the mirror, and he always spoke with a slight lisp, you know, Karloff. And he said to James, and James imitated him, telling me this story, and said, "I think this will be the most sensational thing ever seen on the silver screen."
Here he comes. Let's turn out the light.
You hear the monster walking around in the corridor. That was very scary then, because you don't even notice it now. You don't, well, he's making noise in the corridor, so what? But then it really shook people.
When the monster came out with that rolling walk, you could hear kids' heads hitting. They were hiding behind the seats, and you could hear them trembling.
This scene with Mae Clark, which particularly scared audiences, was inspired by Caligari.
But I went down Market Street to the Orpheum Theater, and in front of the theater was an ambulance. I thought, wait a minute, what kind of a film am I getting into here? And I got in the lobby, and two nurses were standing there. And, you know, I was only about 15 years old, and I was getting to be a little frightened by it all. And during the showing, about in the middle of the film, a lady on the aisle screamed, jumped up, ran up the aisle and out the theater. That was my first example of the promotion department at work, because all of that was obviously, as I see now, was just planted.
Frankenstein was a box office phenomenon. Hit by the Depression, people were grateful for such supernatural escapism.
I was always amazed that people couldn't see Frankenstein in color, because the makeup was green, and it just absolutely bowled you over. Black and white, it was superb, but people missed something, that they didn't see that in color.
Technicolor tests were made for Son of Frankenstein, but abandoned. This scene comes from a home movie shot by Mrs. Karloff of her husband strangling Jack Pierce. The original Frankenstein was previewed in Santa Barbara. Years later, James Whale recalled the event for a friend, film director Curtis Harrington.
After the preview, he was sound asleep about 3 a.m., and suddenly the phone rang from the desk, and they said, "There's someone who wants to speak to you, Mr. Whale." And the voice came on and said, Are you the guy that directed that picture they showed tonight? He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I can't sleep, and I'll be goddamned if I'm going to let you sleep."
The Mummy wasn't all that original an idea when Universal produced the film in 1932, because essentially they were remaking Dracula, using even some of the same cast members, a lot of the same set decorations and props, as a matter of fact, and the same story.
A high priest of ancient Egypt, brought back from the dead, claims the spirit of a princess, played by Zita Johann.
Is anything the matter?
But it played into the public's great fascination in the 20s and 30s with Egypt and Egyptology.
When Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon discovered the buried treasure of King Tutankhamun in Egypt, the author of the script of The Mummy, John Balderston, was present as a New York Times reporter. He wrote for director Karl Freund an unusually restrained horror film.
It has only 1 or 2 scenes in it that last for 5-6 seconds that shock you and scare you. The mummy comes alive. You just see him open his eyes, and you don't see him walking. All you see is a piece of linen bandage trailing across the floor, but that does it.
Boris Karloff played the lead. Turhan Bey, who later starred in The Mummy's Tomb, saw the film in Vienna.
I saw this man with a fez. My father was Turkish, you know, and I often saw him in a fez. I saw a beautiful man. I did not see a monster or a menace. I saw a fascinating, fabulous face.
Karloff's acting was absolutely superb. What he portrayed through his eyes, through all of that makeup, the wrapping, there was this magnificent human being, noble human being.
Permit me to present you with the most sensational find since that of Tutankhamun.
This is very sporting of you. May I ask why?
We Egyptians are not permitted to dig up our ancient dead.
Good evening. We've come to ask for shelter. We've lost our way. We're absolutely cut off. Don't you understand? We can't go forward and we can't go back. The road's blocked on both sides. Landslide. Even Welsh ought not to sound like that.
Karloff felt this role was a waste of his talents. He had little more dialogue than in Frankenstein. But James Whale reveled in this chance to work in the Paul Lenny style, with an added note of perverse humor. He cast Gloria Stewart. She was impressed by Whale's dedication.
Very meticulous. He was in charge of the props. Every morning the props had to be exactly right. Wardrobe he checked very carefully. He had the camera setups all put on the left-hand side of the script. He really had his hand in everything in the making of a film. And this was particularly true in the old Dark House. There are lots of touches that are only James. Very original.
Gloria Stewart wears a dazzling white dress in the film. Whale said he wanted her to look like a white flame.
Universal was setting the standards, and then the other studios started smelling money in these kinds of pictures, and very rapidly we had Paramount producing Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
A version of Dr. Jekyll was Universal's first contribution to the horror film. It featured King Bagot in both roles. John Barrymore had played in an impressive version in 1920. Inspired by the legendary stage performance of Richard Mansfield, he did the transformation in a single sustained take. But the Ruben Mamoulian version surpassed even this. Starring with Frederick March was the stage actress Rose Hobart.
It was really kind of fascinating because Barrymore's version, he had a, you know, his head came up to a peak kind of, and it was so frightening. The minute this awful face came on, you know, everybody kind of went, what is that, you know? And so we saw the whole picture, the way he had done it, made sure that we weren't copying any of the things that he had done.
The transformation from Jekyll into Hyde occurs in a single uncut take. Ruben Mamoulian was interviewed in 1969 by Philip Jenkinson.
Are you prepared to divulge at least some of the secrets that went into the amazing metamorphosis from Jekyll or Jekyll into Hyde? Still has people guessing.
I will save you a great lot of film this time because my answer is going to be very short. No. You'll forgive me. That's the only professional secret that I have kept so far. I'd like to keep it a little longer.
The secret of how it was done was only revealed after Mamoulian's death. The cameraman was Carl Struss, and the trick he used was one he introduced in Ben-Hur when Christ heals the lepers. The filter was graduated from red to blue. Makeup painted red was filmed through the blue filter. As the filter slowly revolved to red, the makeup apparently disappeared. Dr. Jekyll used the trick in reverse. Another victim of his own drugs was Claude Rains as the Invisible Man. He spent this, his first Hollywood picture, swathed in bandages at the mercy of James Whale and the Universal special effects men under John P. Fulton.
It's easy today with the blue screen techniques and so on to do an Invisible Man sequence. But at the time that one was made, it was almost impossible.
You're crazy to know who I am, aren't you? All right, I'll show you. There's a souvenir for you. And one for you. I'll show you who I am and what I am.
Look, he's all eaten away.
Huh? How do you like that, eh?
Claude Rains played with Gloria Stewart.
It was a close set, especially when Claude, lost his bandages and became invisible. So people have asked me, I had no idea. I have no idea. I've never talked to anyone who ever said how it was done.
And it was all done with black velvet. The Invisible Man, when he's running around wearing clothes and you can't see his hands or face, he was wearing a black velvet covering over his head and hands. In fact, they made a whole bodysuit of black velvet. This would leave a dark area. Then the same film would be on the same set without the camera being moved. It's locked down. The same scene would be filmed again on the set, and the set would print through on the black where his face and hands were.
It was horrible. Flora, my darling.
Thank God you're home, Jack.
I would have come to you at once, Flora, but for this.
Claude Rains used to back me into the scenery. You know, until James would say, now, Claude, you are not in the theater. We can just cut and redo it again. It has to be 50-50. Gloria is not going to have her back to the camera. Oh, so sorry, James. Sorry, Gloria. Sorry.
Why did you do this?
For you, Flora.
For me?
Yes, for you, my darling. I wanted to do something tremendous, to achieve what men of science have dreamt of since the world began, to gain wealth and fame and honor, to write my name above the greatest scientists of all time.
Claude Rains became central to my life during all those years from the age of 12 or 13 when I saw The Invisible Man on up through my high school days, because almost all boys are paranoid, huh? There's the macho thing of the you against the world against you. And The Invisible Man says, I'm going to conquer the world. And every boy worth his salt sees that character and becomes Claude Rains, becomes the Invisible Man, and wants to have that power.
I shall offer my secret to the world with all its terrible power. The nations of the world will bid for it, thousands, millions. The nation that wins my secret can sweep the world with invisible armies.
Dieses deutsche Volk ein Vorführung durch eigene Arbeit.
Adolf Hitler seized power in Germany the year the picture appeared, and life began alarmingly to imitate art. Jews were expelled from Germany, and the film industry was severely affected. Carl Laemmle was among those who organized rescue missions. While medieval barbarism was being reintroduced to Germany, Universal continued to exploit it for entertainment, using the style of the old German cinema. Robert Florey made up for losing Frankenstein by directing this thriller based loosely on Edgar Allan Poe. The finale was an elaboration of Caligari.
You fool!
The film caused newspapers to comment on the public appetite for frightening spectacles. Little did they know what was to come. The climax of RKO's King Kong depicted the king of the jungle being shot off the top of the new Empire State Building. The gorilla was animated by Willis O'Brien. When the animal picked up Fay Ray, the audience had to believe the impossible.
It was mostly imagination, although there was this big hand with a big steel rod in it so that they could elevate it. Once they got me locked into the fingers of it, that is to say that I would stand on the floor of the stage and they would just fold those fingers around me and securely, and then by leverage, I went up in the air. The imagination that had to be applied was that not only was I in the hand, but I had to imagine Kong, the whole thing of Kong, the whole creature was there. I did it as long as I possibly could, and then when I felt that I was going to slip through, I would holler, ask them to come and put me down.
Producer Marion C. Cooper was the model for explorer Carl Denham, played by Robert Armstrong.
Do you always take the pictures yourself?
Ever since the trip I made to Africa, I'd have got a swell picture of a charging rhino, but the cameraman got scared. That darn fool, I was right there with a rifle. Seems he didn't trust me to get the rhino before it got him. I haven't fooled with cameramen since, to do it myself.
Think he's crazy, Skipper?
Just enthusiastic.
Enthusiastic. He was like a little boy with his enthusiasms. Just all wound up with excitement about any idea that he might have. And he was very magnetic.
During World War I, when this propaganda poster was current, Merian C. Cooper was a fighter pilot who later served in Poland, and his partner Ernest Schertzak a combat cameraman. They made expedition pictures together, the most famous being Grass. Schertzak directed the live-action sequences in Kong. Cooper and O'Brien were in charge of scenes like this.
Couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe they could do that. And I mean, I really believed. I know somebody said, well, you know, he's only a little toy. Come on, don't tell us that. That's bull. I mean, we knew that was a lie. We knew that it was real.
It is a tribute to O'Brien's work that it is still hard to imagine Kong as a model, despite the improvement in special effects since 1933. But a model it was, although it varied in size from scene to scene. The picture had the most sophisticated special effects of any film of the 1930s. Schertzak and Cooper played the pilots in the final scene themselves.
Well, Denham, the airplane's got him.
Oh, no. It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
Even before release, word got out about Kong, and Fay Wray was signed by Warner's to work on 2 pictures with the hard-driving director Michael Curtiz.
He was part of the camera. He was steel. That was my impression of him. Like, for instance, when people had to stop for lunch, he would march up and down in front of them and say, "Why did they eat? I don't eat."
Mystery of the Wax Museum was released in 2-color Technicolor. Lionel Atwill played the owner of the museum, determined to add Fay Wray to his exhibition.
And I am going to give you immortality.
No, please. Oh, please. I've done nothing to hurt you.
I have no desire to hurt you. You will always be beautiful. Think, my child. In 1,000 years, you will be as lovely as you are now. Come.
No, no.
Come.
Let me go. Let me go.
I stopped as soon as I got a few pieces of wax off his face. It just froze me. I was so stunned to see what I saw underneath that naturally I wasn't going to keep at it and say, "Oh, I want to see more." But he wanted me to keep hitting until it was all off for the sake of the camera.
Oh, that one really scared me. When Fay Wray slapped his face and the face cracked, it was such a surprise. I mean, talk about a surprise. I think everybody screamed and everybody went crazy. And that was a picture that gave me nightmares. The boiling wax. It was the right picture to see color. If I had seen Frankenstein in color, I would have been very unhappy, I think, and I certainly hope it's never colorized today because it's a black and white picture.
Ideal in black and white was The Black Cat, directed for Universal by Edgar Ulmer. On the picture, Ulmer fell for the script girl, Shirley Kassler, and their daughter became an actress and film historian, Ariane.
My father had very definite ideas all the time about the look that he wanted for the film. And again, it goes back to his German background. At the time, you had an architecture that was called the Bauhaus. And my father loved Bauhaus. The set designs of that apartment, that house, is definitely Bauhaus. Plus the fact that he wanted to give it the German expressionistic design and look, the shadow and light. And it was, he just had a wonderful time with it. It was one of his happiest experiences. I know that he always loved this film.
Come, darling, we must go back to bed. You're not strong enough.
He's quite right. You had a severe shock. You must sleep.
Bela Lugosi was cast opposite Boris Karloff for the first time. Audiences in the mid-30s couldn't get enough of horror films, and The Black Cat was one of the darkest and most popular. Lugosi played Dr. Verdegast, betrayed during the war by the Karloff character, Polzig.
You killed her as I am about to kill you.
The climax had Verdegast preparing to skin Polzig alive.
Do you know what I am going to do to you now? No? Did you ever see an animal skin, Hjalmar? That's what I'm going to do to you now.
The front office was appalled at what they were getting, especially since the Papa Laemmle was away, and they really didn't know how this thing was out of hand. This was not what they expected at all. As a consequence, there was 2 days extra shooting that was put in. And my father was always very proud of the fact that he pulled a fast one. The famous scene where you have Karloff with his pussycat in arm, walking and strolling through with all of the encapsulated glass tubes in which he keeps his previous preserved wives. He got that scene in the reshoot. They never understood how wicked and marvelous that scene was.
The Black Cat was the culmination of a personal obsession by Ulmer. He shot it in 19 days on a low budget, and it made a fortune. But Ulmer was in disgrace. His script girl lover was already married to a Laemmle. Universal let him go. Ulmer named the Karloff character after Hans Polzig, art director of the Golem and a follower of the Bauhaus. But he based him on Fritz Lang.
My father had great admiration for Lang, but he was, as a person, not a very nice person. And he felt that he was a sadist. That was the way he worked. I mean, you know, crop in hand and all of the caricatures that we see of what a German kind of director would have been in that era.
Fritz Lang directed the film which probably had the greatest impact on the American science fiction and horror film, Metropolis, a vision of the future made on an epic scale. A half-crazy inventor seeks control through the use of a robot. The robot is given the physical attributes of a young woman, but not the soul. Metropolis inspired James Whale, as Ernest Thesiger as Dr. Pretorius and Colin Clive as Henry Frankenstein harness the energy from an electrical storm to create a woman, a bride for Frankenstein's monster. Whale may have taken ideas from other films, but like Frankenstein, he put them together to create something astonishing, one of the most memorable sequences in film history.
It's coming up!
Whale had fought against doing a sequel to Frankenstein, but finally realized the rich parody he could make with the help of Elsa Lanchester and Ernest Thesiger.
The Bride of Frankenstein.
At 4 o'clock, everything stopped for tea, for these were English players, Colin Clive and Valerie Hobson. The casting of Ernest Thesiger was inspired, for he was a past master of what has come to be known as camp humour.
My first experiment was so lovely that we made her a queen. Charming, don't you think?
Did Whale recall this French trick film from 30 years earlier? Whale made the radical decision that the monster should talk, as in the novel.
Oh, I thought I was alone. Good evening. Smoke? Friend? Yes, I hope so. Have a cigar. They're my only weakness.
I've always been told that my father objected to the monster suddenly becoming articulate, but I think the cinema history has proven him wrong. That film has stood the test of time so well and is so highly acclaimed critically that I think it's a good thing they overrode my father's feelings about being a speaking monster.
Remember, this is bread. 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 And this is wine. To drink.
The monster is taught his few words by a blind hermit.
Good. Good. We are friends, you and I. Friends. Good. Good.
The monster hopes for a similarly warm reception from his bride.
Friend? Friend?
Like many horror films of the 30s, Bride of Frankenstein ran into trouble with the censors.
Bride of Frankenstein was one of the most embattled films of the 1930s because there was something for them to object to, behind every tombstone in it, especially the overtones of blasphemy.
Think of the power to create a man. And I did. I did it. I created a man. And who knows, in time I could have trained him to do my will. I could have bred a race. I might even have found the secret of eternal life.
Henry, don't say those things. Don't think them. It's blasphemous and wicked.
This film was really a lightning rod for controversy, and Whale played them like a violin, to the point where they didn't even understand how they were allowing him to make the film even more subversive, and he would add more religious imagery into the film and more crucifixes. But what he ended up getting away with was the direct representation of the Frankenstein monster as Christ at the crucifixion.
The film did not make quite as much money as its predecessor, but received rave reviews and stands today as perhaps the most admired of all the horror films.
It'll
will be the perfect marriage. The perfect love.
For many critics, this Karloff Lugosi vehicle was the last straw.
Forever and ever. Torture.
These images caused international protests.
Oh, you're avenged!
After this British embargo, American horror films went into hibernation for 2 years. Intended as a whale extravaganza with Lugosi, Dracula's Daughter ended up a B picture without him. This film had something else for censors to object to.
Why are you looking at me that way? Won't I do? Yes, you'll do very well indeed. Do you like jewels, Lily? This is very old and very beautiful. I'm going to show it to you. I don't think I'll pose tonight. I think I'll go if you don't mind. Please don't come any closer.
Dracula's Daughter, I think, was the last, really, of that first cycle. It also marked the end of the Laemmle regime at Universal. And that's another reason that the later horror cycle had a completely different flavor.
The Laemmles lost their studio because they had borrowed too heavily. Laemmle Sr. was a gambler, and he gambled on box office successes that failed to happen. The Standard Capital Corporation took over. Laemmle Sr. survived for only 3 more years. As in a horror film, Laemmle Jr. gradually succumbed to a mysterious illness and became an invalid for the rest of his life. The new regime dropped horror films from their schedules. They too were soon heading for disaster, but a reissue program helped to save them.
Universal never realized that they had some masterpieces. In 1939, there was a theater called the Regina Theater on Wilshire at the corner of La Cienega, where every night, all night long, 24 hours a day, for a year, they played Frankenstein and Dracula. And the lines around the block existed for miles, people coming at 3 in the morning to see these 2 films.
The revival's success prompted the new Universal to make Son of Frankenstein. Basil Rathbone played Wolf von Frankenstein, determined to repeat his father's experiment, without realizing the result of that experiment is still alive. Bela Lugosi played Igor.
You see that? They hanged me once, Frankenstein. They broke my neck. They said I was dead. Then they cut me down.
Lionel Atwill played the police inspector whose arm had been torn off by the monster when he was a boy.
My cousin Jay and I used to imitate him all the time. If we were anyplace near a dartboard, we'd find something, cardboard or cork or something, and put it in the arm and walk over to the dartboard and put the darts in our arm. And people would scream, "What are you doing?" But it was a good effect.
Director Roland V. Lee wrote the picture as he shot it. Yet he said he'd never worked on a film on which there was so much laughter. On Karloff's 51st birthday, he received news of the birth of his daughter, Sarah.
My father felt that by the time the 3rd Frankenstein film was made, that the storyline had run out, that the monster was apt to become, and he was proven right, apt to become a brunt of jokes, a caricature. He had lost a lot of what my father wanted to communicate as far as the monster being a victim.
And he simply felt that the storyline had run out and anything else would have been anticlimactic.
All the same, Karloff's monster was given a memorable exit. Later that year, 1939, war broke out in Europe. It was due to the failures of the peace treaty for the First War, that war which had been the hidden inspiration for so many horror films.
But it wasn't until the end of that first Universal horror cycle that a film in France, J'accuse, faced it right on. And there's a terrifying moment at the end of J'accuse where the dead of World War I rise from their graves with their broken, mutilated faces, and they march on the cities of the world. And in those faces, as they march, you see glimpses of Lon Chaney and Boris Karloff and all the others. And it took that long for the this secret of horror films to be faced directly.
Regardez-les bien, pour que l'envie de vous battre s'arrache à jamais de vos cervelles. Remplissez vos yeux de cette horreur.
There are no monsters because you cannot even define what is a monster. You only consider a monster according to his looks. There are lots of monsters with pretty faces.
This man, as handsome as a Greek god, is SS Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, architect of the final solution, the extermination of Jews, gypsies, and other undesirables in death camps. The Nazis turned the Jews into monsters so they would forever be outsiders. In 1941, Lon Chaney Sr. played Universal's fourth great monster. It was dreamed up by Kurt Siodmak, whose original screenplay was changed somewhat by George Wagner, Universal's producer-director.
He changed. I had an American mechanic coming to England to install a telescope, and he changed him into the son of a lord. I couldn't imagine that Lon Chaney is the son of a lord.
Chaney, the son of the great actor, played with Claude Rains.
That's her name.
Despite the changes, the Wolfman would become the most popular monster of the war years, making several return appearances, and it added to the mythology.
I made a four-liner. I don't know, I never made four-liners in my life, but I made a four-liner. Even a man who is pure in heart and says his prayers at night.
I become a wolf when the wolfbane blooms and the autumn moon is bright.
Now it is published everywhere as a gypsy fairy tale.
Chaney has been bitten by a werewolf and realizes he is turning into one himself. The first transition concentrates on his legs.
Here's a man, he hasn't sinned, and is bitten by a wolf, and has a horrible fate. And once he escapes that fate, he doesn't know what happens to him. It reminds me actually of myself, because I was born a Jew, 1902, in Germany. Would I have chosen to be a Jew in Germany in 1902? No, I wouldn't. I mean, it's our fate. I'm sitting here in this palatial estate which you see today. Yeah, what do we know? Without Hitler, I wouldn't be here.
The Nazis themselves, of course, were real human monsters. And even though the public didn't know what was going on behind the gates of Auschwitz, the experiments that Dr. Josef Mengele and his ilk were carrying out were really strangely paralleled in the plots of a lot of these mad science movies.
They're vivisecting a human being. They're cutting a living man to pieces.
Doctors carrying on unethical experiments, and it was almost there was an intuition that this was going on.
Few people knew about the true horror, like this image from the death camps, and the old-fashioned kind proved as popular as ever in America during the war years. Here, Lugosi plays the monster. Soon, anyone available could play a monster. Sustained by audiences of children, the monster films have outlived far more famous productions, and so have the myths.
Count Dracula sleeps in this coffin, but rises every night at sunset. Chick is right. This is awful silly stuff.
Everyone knows that a vampire is destroyed by daylight. That a werewolf can only be killed by a silver-tipped weapon. Yet this knowledge is purely the product of the movies. Universal movies.
When you ask somebody to draw a picture of Frankenstein, they draw a picture of Boris Karloff. If you ask any 10-year-old kid to talk like Dracula, they talk like Bela Lugosi. And I think that's really an amazing testimony to the durability of these characters, the sheer durability. As in the movies, you know, they keep coming back from the dead, and in real life they seem to as well.
Look out! The lever! Get away from that lever! You'll blow us all to atoms!
Henry! Under the door! Henry!
Get back! Get back!
I want to let you come!
But I can't leave them, I can't!
Yes, go. You live. Go. You stay. We belong dead.
The films have inspired generations of filmmakers and film goers.
How do you like that, eh?
The weirdest thing is that so much of it, here I am, an elderly gentleman, and I saw all these things 60, 65 years ago, and they are imbued in my memory bank. I still get a lot of pleasure just talking about it. I think they were really important films, really important.
For one who has not lived even a single lifetime, you are a wise man.